I started my first job in government just after a major restructuring had happened. Day one, and I could literally feel all the tension in the air. People had been laid off, some had been demoted, some were moved against their will, um, and some were celebrating promotions. Others were just grieving silently. And there I was, a newcomer to Canada, brand new to the workplace, on a student contract. And I was just walking into all of that. Now, here's where it gets even really interesting is that just 2 months earlier, a couple weeks actually earlier than that, I had interviewed with one organization, right? And by the time I started, that organization had split into three. And now I found myself working in one of the three organizations. So this organization where I was just one of the places where all this was going on. And I can imagine what the other two organizations look like. But guess what? If anyone knows how to navigate office politics coming out of that experience, especially as an immigrant, trust me, you're looking at her. And that's what I want to talk about in this video today, how you, as a newcomer, can navigate office politics in Canada. All right, welcome back to my channel. My name is Anita Adufi. I am the CEO and founder of Advanced and Fulfilled Coaching Company. This is a company that is dedicated to helping immigrant professionals advance their careers in Canada without all the overwhelm. All right, and we offer services along resume writing, interview prep, and LinkedIn optimization, as well as career counseling and advisory. And we also recently just launched our corporate training for skill development. So check that out. So today I want to share with you how to navigate office politics as a newcomer. Look, I get it. If you've ever worked in corporate anything, you know that there's politics. As a matter of fact, there is politics everywhere there are humans. All right, it's life. However, it can get really, really, really ugly when you are not just navigating office politics, but you are doing so as somebody who is new to the organization, but additionally, someone who is new to the country in its entirety. So, I want to share with you what some of my experience was like in this journey. Again, this is part of my 10-year career journey in Canada series that I've been doing for many of you who have been following and watching. I want to say thank you so much. If you are new, I'm doing a series right now where I am going through key highlights in my career and things that I had to navigate, but in a structured way that help people get value. So I'm not just sharing stories in and of themselves, but also helping people learn from those stories and find value in what I'm sharing. So you're welcome. If this is your first time on this channel, we're glad to have you here. Make sure you don't walk away without subscribing and turn on notifications so you know every time we have a new video. All right, so office politics as a newcomer in Canada or as an immigrated professional. Now, I want to start by at least helping us all understand what office politics is because I know when people hear office politics, they immediately think that it is something bad. It's not always bad, okay? Wherever there are people, there will be power play, there will be politics in whatever form you want to call it. All right, so office politics really is about people, the power, and the relationships and how these interact in workplaces. All right, it's the unspoken rules, it's the alliances that form, it's the tensions that exist under the surface, right? And guess what? It exists in every workplace. Heck, it exists in families as well. All right, and understanding them would actually help you to thrive and not just survive. Okay, so these are things that I'm just going to be sharing with you, and I want to start by helping you understand what happened. So I talked about how here I was. Let me just say this. If there is, I know, yes, there's office politics everywhere, but as someone who has worked both in private and government and public sector, I can tell you this. It feels as though, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to know what you think about this in the comments, so let me know. But it feels as though office politics is on a whole new level in public sector than it is in private sector. Why that is, I don't know. But believe me, I have worked in public sector, I've worked in private sector, and man, the politics in public sector, whew, it holds nothing. I mean, private sector holds nothing compared to that. But anyway, let me know in the comments if you agree with that or not. So I talked about how, here I was, first day on the job, and I could feel the tension in the air. How bad? This was how bad it was. I remember walking over to a water cooler and I wanted to get water. And someone walks up to me and says, um, so what branch were you in before? And I'm there thinking, I don't know what branch means because, that's what they use, like a unit of in a department in government. And I'm there thinking, I don't know what branch means, and I'm like, I'm with this team. I literally just started today. And I introduced myself. She walked out on me. So I had to, now, like I said, coming into the organization that day one, I already knew there was restructuring because I interviewed with one organization and a name. And when I got my offer letter, it had a different organization name. And I was told that existed, that happened because the organization I interviewed with had been split into three different organizations. And actually, the branch that is hiring me is within this organization. Wouldn't have been my preferred one in hindsight, but you know, it was good because it really just set me up in my public service career in Canada. And so there was all of this going on. And one of the things I quickly realized from that conversation with that lady, and I thank God in hindsight that that was one of the very first conversations that I had outside of my team because I didn't think I realized how bad it was and how much people were hurting about whatever had played out that I wasn't even a part of. I wasn't even there. But not everybody knows because this is a huge organization. Not everybody knows everybody. And if you are new, it's assumed somebody who had been promoted or they considered unjustly promoted brought you in. So there was all of that. Now, on a normal day, office politics is hard with that as a newbie, without even all of that extra layer of drama that was going on, right? And so really it was one of those things where I immediately knew that I had to walk on eggshells around pretty much everybody, right? Now, and as a new immigrant on student placement, remember, I had zero social capital in this place, zero history with anyone. I don't even know the people that interviewed me. The first time I met them was the day they interviewed me. The next time I met them was the first day on the job, right? So all I had was just me, my work ethics, and quite frankly, a deep desire to learn and grow my career. All right. But here's one thing I'll tell you, and maybe I'll actually share points as I go along, is that the first lesson that this taught me, and I learned that very quickly at that watercolor experience, is that every interaction matters. Even the casual conversations in office, every interaction matters. If you remember nothing, please remember that every interaction matters. All right. Um, right? So you may not even notice that politics is happening until you're out of a decision, an opportunity, or worse still, and I've seen this happen to a lot of people, is that they lose their jobs. All right. So that's why it's harder. And that's why it's important that as a newcomer, as an immigrant, that you pay attention to politics in workplaces in Canada. All right. So, point number two, awareness. Okay. You have to stay aware. Awareness is the first step to empowerment. So, I'm just going to share with you how I learned to handle this in this workplace. And I might pull examples from other workplaces as well if there are examples that fit that. And I'm just going to share about how I handled it with you. So one of the first things that I started doing in handling office politics was really first I started observing patterns. I paid attention to who gets listened to, who has informal influence. It wasn't just about who holds titles. See, I see that a lot of people, especially for many of us as newcomers to Canada, we're coming from very hierarchical societies compared to Canada, where depending on the organization, it can be hierarchical, but also there's some level of horizontal structure in terms of who gets respected. Everybody really is considered. You are expected to respect everybody regardless of who they are. And so when we come into this society, we tend to forget that dynamic has shifted. And so we naturally want to gravitate towards those who hold certain titles. Be mindful about that because you just never know What you really need to pay attention to is who gets listened to, who holds informal influence, right? Who are the connectors in the organization? Because there are some people who may hold no power, no influence, no authority whatsoever, but they are great connectors. You need somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody to do something for you that is very vital. Those are the connectors. Those are the people that you want to identify. So I started observing some of those patterns, who is who, right? And as I observed these patterns, it really started to help me understand what needed to happen next, which is number two, build strategic relationships. All right. Now, I would say again, it's not just so much about the titles. Remember that. Okay. And I'll talk about that in a moment here, or what I did in that in a moment here. Right. It's about, and it's not about trying to be fake or sucking up to anybody. You really do not even want to do that. You want to be as authentic as possible, but you also want to be very intentional and strategic at the same. So what exactly did that look like, being intentional and strategic? It meant that when I identify who those connectors were, when I identify who those people who had influences were, I made sure that I built those relationships. And it was just as simple as sometimes asking them on coffee chats, or just even sometimes walking into their office. And this was all even pre-pandemic, so it made things a little easier. Sometimes you can walk into someone's office, knock on their door, do you have a minute, and introduce myself and introduce what branch I was working in. And if I know that they had been impacted in one way or another with the restructuring that had happened, I would make time to just have that conversation and say, hey, I know that as there was a restructuring that happened, and I can't begin to imagine how everyone feels. And I would admit my feeling as well, in that I feel a little awkward that I'm walking right into that, and I will talk to them about, hey, I don't know if you were impacted. If you were, I'm really sorry. And then I'll just ask questions around how long they've been in the organization, what roles they've held, why they choose what they do. Really just center conversations around them. People love to talk about themselves. But in doing all of that, yes, I was trying to, build relationships and be strategic, but there was also an intentionality that was settled with a lot of empathy and genuineness. Again, I cannot emphasize enough. If you cannot be genuine about this, then please don't even think about embarking on it, right? But there was also a genuineness that I had about, I really truly wanted to get to know them. I would have wanted to know them whether or not that situation existed, right? And so that being a situation that I had come into, only even in my mind gave me more to work with, quite frankly, because people are most vulnerable when moments of pain like that happen, right? And people can also tell when you're genuine and when you're not, all right? And typically what would happen is I would walk away from conversations, and I eventually became this one person that everybody was angry about everybody else, but everybody agreed around that Anita was such a very great and sweet person. Again, wasn't, anyway, you know what I mean. But it was really nice to be able to just navigate around all of that, right? And so when I would have those conversations with them, it can even be sometimes in the hallway, at meetings, small talks. I run into someone on the street, I recognize them from the office, I will go over, introduce myself. Sometimes it was awkward, other times it was really nice. But for the most part, when people saw your heart and that it was genuine, they tended to open up, which was really great, right? And then what happens is that you now find that you have relationships with all these different people who, on a normal day, may not agree with anything, but now they all agree that you're somebody that is nice to talk to, right? And which brings me to the third thing I'll talk about in building relationships is build those relationships across different levels. Again, many immigrants come from cultures that are very hierarchical, and so you tend to want to just go with titles. Avoid that mistake. Okay. I built relationship with security men in the building, cleaners, janitors. I built relationships with, because sometimes I'm there late, and when I'm working late, I knew the names of people who clean the office regularly. If somebody was new, I would know because I always said hi to every single one of them. Sometimes I would have chats with them. I made friends with executive members. I made friends with non executive members, with middle managers, with other students, right? I made friends with other students across the organization. And this really helped in that sometimes there might be information you need to gain access to that won't come through those very formal official channels. But over that coffee chat, someone might say, hey, you know what? There's actually an opening coming up very soon in my department. Be sure to apply and let me know if you do. Like those kinds of conversations started opening up, right? So build relationships across different levels because you just never know. Remember what I said about connectors. Connectors may not necessarily hold any kind of power, influence, or authority or position, but they know people and they can connect you to the right people. You need connectors. Actually, there's a book on that. I'll put the title of the book. I remember reading that book. I'll put the title of the book in the description. And it really was about five different kinds of relationship you need to have. And Connectors was one of them. And I really like that particular book. And it's such an easy read. Okay, this is not about a book review. All right. So the third thing that I did was I stayed professional but I wasn't passive. Okay. I wasn't passive, but I stayed professional. I would speak up at meetings. I would speak up if something wasn't right. I would speak up as much as I could speak up as my student status allowed me. But there were times that it wasn't comfortable. There were times that I was taking a big risk. I was respectful, all right, and I will give credit where credit is due because sometimes as a student, there's not a lot of pressure on you to get things perfectly right, and so many people will come to your aid. And the work that I did at the time, I had a lot of input from people. And believe me, when I was presenting that work to executives within the organization, which was what I needed to do, I made sure that I acknowledged every single person who helped. Can you imagine being a manager who has invested in a student and helped them develop a very pivotal project? And at the end of the day, nobody would know whether or not you did anything. But that student stands in front of executive members and acknowledge you. That speaks volumes. All right. And so I did that as well. So when necessary, you want to make sure that you are speaking up, giving credit. Do not take credit for yourself alone. Give credits, but also learn how to insert yourself into credits. There are people who might try to steal your thunder, and they will take credit for work that you did, especially if you're a student or a newcomer or somebody who doesn't understand the dynamics yet. They tend to do that. All right, let me give you an example of how you can do that if someone ever tries to steal your credits in a meeting. You can just say something along the lines of, I'd like to first of all thank Nancy. I'm just going with an example, random name. I'd like to thank Nancy for your hard work on this project. Honestly, I don't know how you pull that off, but kudos to you. Good job. And I just want to say that, I am really grateful that you give me the opportunity to contribute, no matter how little my part was in this, or I really enjoyed the fact that you allowed me to do the research or the initial assessment of all the files on this project. I really learned a lot. You can go ahead and list one or two things you learned. You make it look like Nancy was such a great leader, a great teacher, but guess what you've also done? You've also let everybody in the room know that you did do some work. It wasn't just all Nancy, but you've said it in such a way that is so humble and so giving credit to Nancy. Nancy will likely be blushing. She won't even see what you just did there. All right. So that's an aside, right? Because sometimes I know I'm saying give credit where credit is due, but there are times that you don't get the credit that is due to you. That's how you go about getting that credit for yourself. All right. Or you can do that over an email as well. Okay. But just something to think about. Now, the other thing that I did was, and this one, I think every new immigrant can relate to this one. Man, I had a work version of me, and I still do till today to a very large extent. I know someone might say, but you just talked about being authentic. Isn't that inauthentic? No. Now, you can have a version of yourself that needs to show up at work that does not take away your authenticity. All right. I learned how to adapt my communication style without losing my values. Now, I'm not someone who uses swear words. People at work will use swear words a lot. I do not use swear words. Okay. Now, would I have my closer to Canadian accent. Yes, I do sometimes. Um, and then sometimes it's also just even being conscious about the languaging that I'm using, right? And also learning to be more direct. If I'm talking to a 50-year-old male white counterpart at the workplace, it's not going to be the same as talking to a 50-year-old Nigerian man in the same workplace. The way I'm going to communicate is going to be different because there are cultural nuances that, for one, would make me look like I am just disrespectful, and for the other, would make me look like I am not confident enough. And so I learned how to adapt communication styles to balance all that without losing my value. It didn't mean that I was agreeable with everything, right? But there was that. Now, why is this important? There is a difference, and then there needs to be a balance between being politically aware and being personally grounded, right? And so I had to learn to find that balance where I can be aware of all the things that are going on, but I can be personally grounded in my own values. And that's why it's important that you have your personal values that you live by. And so finding that balance really helps. You don't have to play dirty, but you can play smart. And that's what I learned to do. Right now, all of this that I've said, it doesn't mean that I didn't make any mistakes. Of course, I made mistakes. All right. I remember when many of you know that I started out working in McDonald's. I remember when I was working there, I made that mistake of trying to play to titles. And so I would try to make friends with all the managers, but not my teammates. That really almost cost me dearly. All right. It didn't even help that many of my colleagues at McDonald's were all Filipinos who spoke a different language from English. And so next thing I know is they would say something in their language and I'm sidelined from everything. And then a manager will come in and it will look like I'm doing nothing. I'm just standing around. Not because I am, but because something somewhere has switched. And it's usually done in such a way that you can't really prove anything, right? But it took me a while to start to unpack that and undo that, right? And so I had to relearn how to do that. I had to relearn how to insert myself back into their midst without losing a sense of that teamwork. All right, so you don't have to play dirty, but you can play smart. All right, so some of the mistakes that I made is, number one, I trusted too quickly, and many people do this. Now look, the Canadian culture is very interesting. Everybody looks nice until they're not. I'm not trying to bash on white Canadians or anything here, please. All right, but there are cultures that sometimes just misalign for whatever reason, and these things create real hurt in people. And having been there, I will be doing a disservice if I don't at least help people understand what you just went through for those who have been through. And I feel like if I were to take a poll, at least half working immigrants have been through this, right? So trusting too quickly, just because someone smiles, is nice, is soft spoken, does not necessarily mean that they are to be trusted very quickly. All right, people have to have opportunity to prove themselves. Now, it doesn't mean you're going in suspecting everybody of evil. It just means that you're going in being aware that you don't take everything on face value. All right, so be careful, which brings me to the second thing. Because you're trusting, you tend to overshare frustrations to the wrong people. Sometimes you really just want to vent, but vent to the wrong person, and before you know, there's stories around you flying around. She's lazy, she complains a lot, she doesn't want to work hard, and we both know that's not what's happening, right? So you want to be really mindful, been there, done that. All right. And then the third thing is, even where you can even miss it wrong altogether, thinking I don't need to engage in politics, I just need to do good work. That would be the undoing of you, right? Because we talk a lot about visibility and being visible to the right people. But excuse me, part of that is that sometimes you engage in this thing, right? And engaging again does not necessarily mean it's not the dirty things that we might sometimes think about. It's just really the fact that um again, you're understanding what the power dynamics is within your organization, right? And making sure that you're doing the great work you're doing, but you're also visible in the right ways, in the right rooms at the same time, right? So and one thing I want to say is that even if you do misstep, it's part of the learning curve. Like I shared with when I was in McDonald's, I did have a misstep, but I was able to reinsert myself and gain the trust of my colleagues all over again. And how did I do that? It was simple. when we're working together, I just engage them in conversations that were somewhat not personal, like trying to dig into their lives, but like personable conversations like, oh, how was your weekend? What did you do? Right? Or what were you doing in Filipino before, in the Philippines before? Do you have family here? Do you have siblings? Just little chit chat questions like that as we're working. And before you know, I'm asking them and I'm also sharing about myself. Now, Nigerians, we don't share. We don't do that. Typically, you don't need to know my kids' names. But I realized that it was part of the ways that I could bring down those walls that I had built up by trying to make friends with managers and not my teammates, right? So if you make a mistake, you can always just take it as part of the learning curve and see how you can get back on track, right? Now, overall, okay, and this is where I'm going to wrap it up. Overall, you want to make sure that you are emotionally intelligent. Listen more than you speak at first. Okay, listen more than you speak. At the beginning of your time in any workplace, even if you don't speak up at meetings, nobody's going to get upset. I know. I'm one of those that will tell you, make sure you speak up at meetings. But the first couple weeks, if you don't, that's okay. Worst case scenario, however, if you must speak up, ask a lot of questions. Okay? So that one, your voice is heard, and two, you're someone who is considered as thoughtful. When you ask questions, you're seen as somebody who is interested, you're curious, and you're thoughtful. Okay? And sometimes your questions, intelligent questions, can also trigger things in people that make them start to think differently about things. All right. But overall, listen more than you speak at first. Be slow to speak, be quick to hear. Number two, align yourself with people who share same values. And if you find nobody, my mantra is be nice to everybody. You don't have to be friends with everybody, but you can be nice to everybody. All right. Many places I find myself, I tend to win a, a not a contest, but I tend to win an award for. And I actually legit have an award for this. Most popular, not friendly. Most popular. Is it popular or friendly? I forget which one it was that I had, but a friend of mine had the other one. I had the other one, and the reason I think it was most friendly. The reason is that like people meet me and they think we're BFFs. I don't know what I do to them, but anyway, I get that. All right, but find people you can be nice to everyone. You don't have to be friends with everyone, but you can be nice to everyone. And then three, document your work and your wins. I cannot overemphasize documentation. If there are conversations that make you feel uncomfortable, document those as well. In a nice way that you're not trying to set up anybody to fail, but you are making sure that you're leaving paper trail of things that are happening. All right. Don't expect always that other people will advocate for you. It's nice to have people who can advocate for you, but learn to also advocate for yourself. Remember, I said if something doesn't look right, learn to speak up. Okay. Protect your peace. Know when to walk away from toxic dynamics. Now, the funny thing is that when I was in this organization, I don't know what it was. Again, it's an open secret that I'm a Christian. And there are certain things that I just cannot for the life of me do, regardless of what it is. I don't care what it will cost me. You won't find me doing it when it starts to go against my core values. If I'm at a water cooler conversation, as long as it's centered around the work, I'm fine with it. As long as it's centered around like what's coming up in the pipeline or within the organization, I'm fine with it. But the moment it starts to shift into talking about this person said this and that person did that, I've walked away. With time, I didn't even know that people were observing this. And then with time, I remember one time they were having a conversation and then they started to gossip about someone. And one of them said, hey, Annie's here. She's not going to like that. She's a Christian. And I was like, wait, hold up. Right? And it was very interesting to hear. Or one of the other common ones that I tend to hear is when people start cursing in front of me, typically someone else would say, you can't curse in front of her. She doesn't use swear words. And as a Christian, I want to believe that she doesn't like that either. It's crazy, but these are real things that happen to me, right? And they're very minute. But the biggest thing, and I remember vividly, was one time I was in a place I was on temporary and I wasn't going to get retained. And another executive walks into my executive's office and says to my executive, why aren't you retaining this person? We need her here. Not a lot of people can pull that for you if you haven't proven yourself to be of value. And that's what I'm going to leave you with as I wrap this up finally, right? Is that regardless of what it is, office politics inevitable, no doubt. Whether you like it or not, it exists, it will be there. Now, as an immigrant, you don't have a lot of luxury of ignoring it, but you do have the strength, the wisdom, and the resilience to navigate it. Not just for you to strive to survive in the organization, but you need to thrive. All right. And you need to be able to lead and influence people positively. All right. But in all of that, one thing that would always make you stand out is that you must have value, undisputable value, that even if someone hates your guts, they can say without a shadow of doubt, bring this person in and problem solved. You want to make sure you're that kind of person. And I can assure you that the moment you're that kind of person, it won't matter what politics people are playing, you would all of a sudden become non aligned to all of that. That's a whole thing, all right? That's non alignment. It's a thing. Anyway, it's a thing in world politics where you're not on either of the fighting blocks, right? And so the war cannot and should not touch you, all right? But eventually touch them. But understanding that that war can still touch you and knowing how to make sure that you're strategically positioned in the event that it does. But you don't even get there if you don't have value. So focus on building value, but focus on building relationships across different layers of the organization, and focus on making sure that you show up authentically as yourself. I really hope this helps someone. I want to know in the comments what your office politics experience has been. What are you doing to navigate it? Share in the comments so that others can learn as well. And I will see you in the next video. Take care and bye.